Jai Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Madhava Jai Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Madhava Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Jamuna Tira Vanasari Jamuna Tira Vanasari Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Kunda Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Yashodanandana Brajajanandana Jamuna Tira Vanasari Jamuna Tira Vanasari Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunda Bihari Radha Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Rama Hare 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 Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Hare Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama Hare Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Ram Hare Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Gaur Pinanandi. Dayam Vishupad Paramahamsa Pri Vrajagacharya Stotra Satta Sri Simad His Divine Grace Thirabhayu Charanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Skandi BC Founder Acharya Divine Grace Srila Prabhupada Ki Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Hari Nam Sankirtan Ki Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Tagore Pimanande. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru to Sri Gauranga, all glories to Sri Prabhupada. Om Agyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Sarakaya Chakshurandiritam Jena Tasmai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhisam Sapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Gadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Sri Guru Sri Juta Padakamalam Sri Gurun Vaisnavam Sha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragunatam Vitam Tvam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Sri Vishakanvitam Scha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Suti Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Narayanam namaskritya dharam chaiva narottamam devim saraswatim vyasam tato jayamudiraye. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is our very means of conquest, let us first offer respectful obeisances unto Narayana, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, unto Narayana Rishi, the supremmost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Sridham Vyasadeva, the author. Nasta prayasavadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati tamasloke bhaktir bhavati naistike. By regularly hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam and by rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome within the heart becomes destroyed practically to nil, and a loving devotional service unto the Supreme Lord, with praise, with transcendental songs, becomes established as an irrevocable fact. Idam Bhagavatam Nama Puranam Brahmasamhitam Uttama Charitam Sakara Bhagavan Rishi Nishreya Sayalokasya Dhanyam Swasyayanam Mahad. This Srimad Bhagavatam, known as the Grantaraj, the king of all Vedic literatures, is the literary incarnation of God. It is compiled by the incarnation of God, the Sridham Vyasadeva. It is meant for the ultimate good of all people. It is all successful, all blissful, and all perfect. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Sri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Sradhyaya Namaha. Om Sradhyaya Namaha. Om Sradhyaya Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim. Yat kripa tamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Yat kripa tamaham bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. Hare Krishna. Welcome to our morning Bhagavatam class. We are continuing from the 7th canto, chapter 11, entitled The Perfect Society for Social Classes. The last few days we have been covering, actually yesterday mainly, the briefly the 4 Varnas, which, as we have noted also yesterday, are very similar, naturally, to the description in the Bhagavad Gita. So we were also mentioning yesterday how immediately after describing the 4 Varnas and the qualities that individuals need to have or develop within these Varnas, then Narada Muni begins in 5 verses, which we are covering this morning, to explain about what we can refer to as Stri Dharma. Sridharma. This Sridharma is referred to in the Bhagavatam. Grandfather Bhishmadev speaks about the duties and responsibilities, and so does Narada Muni here in this section of the Bhagavatam. So we will read basically 25 or recite 25, and then we will go successively. Let's see how far we can cover. So text 25, Strinam cha pati devanam tat shushusha anukulata tad bandhushu anuvritish cha nityam tad vrata dharanam strinam chapati devanam Srinam chapati devanam tat shushrushanu-kulata tad bandhushvanuvrittischa nityam tad vrattadharanam Strinam chapati devanam tat shushrushanu-kulata tad bandhushvanuvrittischa nityam tad vrattadharanam Strinam chapati devanam tat shushrushya nukulata tad bandhushvanuvrittischa nityam tad vrattadharanam
Strinam chapati devanam
Strinam chapati devanam tat shushrushya-nukulata tad bandhushvanuvrittischa nityam tad vrattadharanam Strinam chapati devanam tat shushrushya-nukulata tad bandhushvanuvrittischa nityam tad vrattadharanam Strinam of women cha also patidevanam who have accepted their husbands as worshipable tat shushrushya readiness to render service to her husband anukulata being favorably disposed towards her husband tat bandhushu unto the friends and relatives of the husband anuvrittihi being similarly disposed to treat them well for the satisfaction of the husband cha and nityam regularly tat vratadharanam accepting the vows of the husband and acting exactly as the husband acts. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. to render service to the husband, to be always favorably disposed toward the husband, to be equally well disposed toward the husband's relatives and friends, and to follow the vows of the husband. These are the four principles to be followed by women described as chaste. And you repeat after me. To render service to the husband.
To render service to the husband.
To be always favorably disposed.
To be always favorably disposed.
Toward the husband.
Toward the husband.
To be equally well disposed.
To be equally well disposed.
Toward the husband's relatives.
Toward the husband's relatives.
And friends.
And friends.
And to follow the vows.
And follow the vows.
Of the husband.
Of the husband.
These are the four principles.
These are four principles.
To be followed by women.
To be followed by women.
Described as chaste. Report. It is very important for peaceful household or life that a woman follow the vow of her husband. Any disagreement with the husband's vow will disrupt family life. In this regard, Chanaka Pandit gives a very valuable instruction. Dampatyo kalaho nasti tatra Sri Swayam Agataha. When there are no fights between husband and wife, the goddess of fortune automatically comes to the home. A woman's education should be conducted along the lines indicated in this verse. The basic principle for a woman, the basic principle for a chaste woman, is to be always favorably disposed toward her husband. In Bhagavad Gita 1:4, it is said, Strishu dustashu varsneya jayate varnasankaraha. If the women are polluted, there will be varnasankara population. In modern terms, the varnasankara are the hippies who do not follow any regulative injunctions. Another explanation is that when the population is Varnasankara, no one can know who is on what platform. The Varnasrama system scientifically divides society into 4 Varnas and 4 Ashramas. But in Varnasankara society, there is no such distinctions. And no one can know who is who. That's even more true today than ever before. In such a society, no one can distinguish between a Brahmana, a Kshatriya, a Vaishya, and a Shudra. For peace and happiness in this material world, the Varnasrama institution must be introduced. The symptoms of one's activities must be defined, and one must be educated accordingly. Then spiritual advancement will automatically be possible. Translation again. To render service to the husband, to be always favorably disposed toward the husband, to be equally well disposed toward the husband relatives and friends, and to follow the vows of the husband. These are the 4 principles to be followed by women described as chaste. Mm. So the Bhagavatam, we should always keep in mind, is giving us knowledge, information that is based on the principles of what we call Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma means principles of relating to natural life, both on the transcendental level as well as on the material level. Scientific principles that have been enacted or created, established, introduced made by Krishna himself, isn't it? So it means that actually, just like Prabhupada would refer to the Manu Samhita and the Vedic literatures in general, they are meant to be the guiding principles for mankind. If we neglect to follow those principles, and of course, most people in the world don't know about Bhagavad Gita, or Bhagavad Gita is more known than the Bhagavatam. So still, most people don't know Bhagavad Gita, what to speak of Srimad Bhagavatam. They know even less Bhagavatam. When I first came to the temple, I knew already about Bhagavad Gita, but I had never heard about Bhagavatam. I think that's probably quite common for most Western people. Indonesia might be different. But Bhagavatam is there actually in Bali, although maybe less known, but it definitely outside of Bali is practically unknown. So, so the idea is that, I mean, and that was a great revelation for me, and I'm sure for many others who joined the movement of Krishna consciousness, is that, we don't have to rack our brains. We don't have to spend years and years trying to find some, invent some new system, how to deal with whatever it may be. There's standard knowledge, and there are standard practices and standard principles and standard concepts. Standard means, in this context, eternal concepts, eternal principles, eternal formulas that once we come to know about them, and then when we follow them, then we will get the desired results. Just like here it mentions in the purport, I think in the text itself, yeah, in the purport, when there are no fights between husband and wife, the goddess of fortune automatically comes to the home. So if one wants to have the goddess of fortune come to his home, this is one of the principles. So, especially in our modern day context and situation, there's a lot of misunderstanding, regarding so many things, practically regarding everything. The basic misunderstanding, of course, is that what is the goal of life, or what is the purpose of life, and who I am, isn't it? It starts with very basic, such basic questions, and therefore the whole Prabhupada referred to the Western edition of modern civilization. You know, has we could say created havoc in general society, and that has permeated, practically speaking, all the countries in the world, because people, especially in the last couple of hundred years, as North America developed materially, because people are in the material platform, material bodily concept of consciousness. So people have looked up. Even today, people, of course, I would say maybe less nowadays, because America is falling apart, and the whole world is falling apart in a very drastic manner, and very quickly as well, because we are not following these basic principles. And therefore, we as devotees, and we as an international society meant to spread Krishna consciousness, need to understand these most important instructions given by Narada Muni. I think it's good that we read the rest of these verses, because they're all interconnected, but we immediately get a sense of direction, so to speak. We immediately can begin to understand, by reading this first instruction given by Narada Muni, that there is a particular role, a particular mood and mentality that are meant to be especially, well, in the Vedic culture, it's not especially. In the Vedic culture, all women are meant to be married. That was a standard practice, which, of course, in modern times especially, we have deviated in a very major way. The whole understanding being that actually, because of individuals not being God conscious, because of the possibility of being exploited and abused, women have traditionally, and not only women, there are, we mentioned the other day how the Bhagavatam clearly identifies 5 or 6 individuals who need special attention, who need special protection specifically. Women being in that category also. And then the children. By nature, there are individuals within society who are by nature dependent, who are meant to be dependent, who by nature are dependent. And it's like cows are dependent on those who look after them. Children are dependent upon the parents. Elder folks are dependent on the other family members. When we are sick, we are dependent on other members or relatives. So similarly, women are also by nature dependent. Let's continue to see what Narada Muni is further explaining. The next verse doesn't have any purport. It has, the next verse is actually 2 verses. So I'll just read the Sanskrit once and then immediately give the translation. Samajano pale pabyam griha mandana vartanai swayam cha mandita nityam parimrishta parichtada kamair uchcha vachai sadvi prasrasyena damena cha vakyai satyai priyai primna kale kale bhajat patim. Translation: a chaste woman must dress nicely and decorate herself with golden ornaments for the pleasure of her husband. Always wearing clean and attractive garments, she should sweep and clean the household with water and other liquids so that the entire house is always pure and clean. She should collect the household paraphernalia and keep the house always aromatic with incense and flowers, and must be ready to execute the desires of her husband. Being modest and truthful, controlling her senses, and speaking in sweet words, a chaste woman should engage in the service of her husband with love, according to time and circumstances. The Prabhupada is not giving a purport, so I will not comment on this also. There is a purport in the next 2 verses. Text 28. Santusta lolupa daksha dharmagya priya satyavak apramata shuchi snigdha patin patitam bhajet. Translation and purport: a woman, a chaste woman, should not be greedy, but satisfied in all circumstances. She must be very expert in handling household affairs and should be fully conversant with religious principles. She should speak pleasingly and truthfully and should be very careful and always clean and pure. Thus, a chaste woman should engage with affection in the service of a husband who is not fallen. Purport: according to the injunction of Yajnavalkya, an authority on religious principles, ashuddhe sampratiksho hi mahapataka dushitaha. One is considered contaminated by the reactions of great sinful activities when one has not been purified according to the methods of the Dasabidha Samskara. In the Bhagavad Gita, however, the Lord says, Namam duskritino murdha prapadyante naradamaha. Those miscreants who do not surrender unto me are the lowest of mankind. The word naradama means non-devotee. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also said, Ye bhaje se barav abhakta hina shara. Anyone who is a devotee is sinless. One who is not a devotee, however, is the most fallen and condemned. It is recommended, therefore, that a chaste wife not associate with a fallen husband. A fallen husband is one who is addicted to the 4 principles of sinful activity, namely illicit sex, meat eating, gambling, and intoxication. Specifically, if one is not a soul surrendered to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he is understood to be contaminated. Thus, a chaste wife or chaste woman is advised not to agree to serve such a husband. It is not that a chaste wife should be like a slave while her husband is Naradama, the lowest of men. Although the duties of a woman are different from those of a man. Now, this is an important point Prabhupada is making. The duties of women are different from those of men. A chaste woman is not meant to serve a fallen husband. If her husband is fallen, it is recommended that she give up his association. Giving up the association of her husband does not mean, however, that a woman should marry again and thus indulge in prostitution. If a chaste woman, if a chaste woman unfortunately marries a husband who is fallen, she should live separately from him. Similarly, a husband can separate himself from a woman who is not chaste according to the description of the Shastra. The conclusion is that a husband should be a pure Vaishnava and that a woman should be a chaste wife with all the symptoms described in this regard. Then both of them will be happy and make spiritual progress in Krishna consciousness. So it's like, it's not only one-sided. The responsibility lies upon both the husband and the wife. The same example in education. Both the teacher and the student must be qualified. Then there will be good exchange. Then there will be the desired result. So similarly, for householder life to be pleasant, to be peaceful, both the husband and the wife need to be qualified. And this point is, again, very important, that each individual, means husband and wife, and for that matter in general, male and female, or man and woman, they, by nature, because they have a different body, they have a different gross physical body, and they have also, largely because of their gross physical body, they have a different subtle body. The psychology of a man is different than the psychology of a woman, isn't it? So therefore, the authorities on dharma, like Sri Narada Muni and others like Grandfather Bhishmadev, they are members of the, we have our 12 Mahajans, Mahajana, one must follow, yes. One must follow in the footsteps of great personalities. So they are the authorities in in these principles of dharma. We'll just read the last instruction here given by Narada Muni. Mahajena gata, yes. Mahajena gata sapanta. Mahajana jena gata sapanta. One must follow in the footsteps of the great Mahajans. So text 29. Ya patim hari bhavena bhajet shrir eva tat para haryat mana harer loke patya shrir eva modate. Translation: the woman who engages in the service of her husband, following strictly in the footsteps of the goddess of fortune, surely returns home back to Godhead with her devotee husband and lives very happily in the Vaikuntha planets. Purport: the faithfulness of the goddess of fortune is the ideal for a chaste woman. The Brahma Samhita 529 says, Lakshmi Sahasrasata Sambrahmasi Vyamanam. In the Vaikuntha planets, Lord Vishnu is worshipped by many, many thousands of goddesses of fortune. And in Goloka Vrindavan, Lord Krishna is worshipped by many, many thousands of gopis. all of whom are goddesses of fortune. A woman should serve her husband as faithfully as a goddess of fortune. A man should be an ideal servant of the Lord, and a woman should be an ideal wife like the goddess of fortune. Then both husband and wife will be so faithful and strong that by acting together they will return home, back to Godhead, without a doubt. In this regard, Srila Madhavendra gives this opinion. Harir asmin stita iti srinam bhartrari bhavana Shishyanam cha gurau nityam shudhanam brahmanadishu Vrityanam swamini tatha hari bhava udirata. A woman should think of her husband as the Supreme Lord. Similarly, a disciple should think of the spiritual master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. A Shudra should think of a Brahmana as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And a servant should think of his master as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In this way, all of them will automatically become devotees of the Lord. In other words, by thinking this way, all of them will become Krishna conscious. So these are very important instructions being given by Narada Muni. And Prabhupada, on many, many occasions, would point out how most important qualities for a woman is to be chaste and to be shy. Shyness, Prabhupada explains, shyness is meant to be a natural quality. And so when Prabhupada went to the West, he was very surprised how this quality of shyness was very lacking. Shyness means being reserved and being very cautious, not so easily, spontaneously mixing with others, especially with mixing with the opposite sex. So Srila Prabhupada, although we all know how Prabhupada made some concessions in terms of allowing women to be engaged in many preaching activities, and made various statements that, because of that context in the West, that women and in the West, women and men are the same. But one needs to take into consideration, and that is something that Prabhupada was very expert in terms of time, place, and circumstances. Although Prabhupada made these conceptions, he always upheld these basic principles that are referred to here by Narada Muni in terms of what is meant to be the role and the responsibility of a faithful and chaste wife. And of course, there was that big dilemma, big confusion that came about at one point in the early days, because Prabhupada was, on the one hand, emphasizing, when speaking about Gurukul and Brahmacharya life, that our brahmacharis, our devotees, need to get very good brahmachari training, and if at all possible, they should remain brahmachari for the whole life. And at the same time, all the women should get married. So there were questions how to manage this, how to simultaneously promote that brahmacharis not marry, and at the same time follow this principle that women should be married. So of course, the basic principle is that um, young boys or young men should all receive brahmachari training. And those who can remain as brahmacharis are encouraged, but the majority will not actually remain as brahmacharis. But having received this proper training, they will be able to enter householder life and be ideal husband. So, although this particular section is dealing with the role and responsibility and the qualities meant to be developed by women, Prabhupada also makes a point, and the verses also indicate how there's also an equal level of responsibility on the part of men, on the part of women. And of course, the whole modern society is the way it is now, extremely disorganized, extremely fallen, especially family life in the Western country is like practically non-existent. Because these basic principles of Krishna consciousness have not been followed by neither men nor women. So it is partly for this reason, therefore, that Prabhupada wanted that we have this proper training through Varnashram colleges. Varnashram colleges are meant to give that proper understanding and training where individuals are properly prepared before they enter, those who will enter into family life, householder life. And of course, all of this can more easily, more quickly as well be understood if we live a more we could say normal lifestyle. Normal lifestyle means if we agree to live according to the prescribed social arrangement, which is largely, we repeat this all the time because it's so important, which is largely an agrarian lifestyle, where, in other words, the more we live in a more natural environment, the duties and responsibilities of men and women more easily become known, become understood. They become obvious. If you're living in the country where you don't have all of the modern facilities that are there, for example, small example, in Hungary, where Sridham Maharaj has been developing the community there for many years, and they call it Krishna Valley. So of course they have a good amount of land, and therefore they have many buildings for householders. Every family has their own home. They have different homes. They have a system where if you're a newlywed family, that means you don't have children, then there's a small home for you. If you have 1 or 2 children, there's a medium home for you. If you happen to have like 4 or 5 kids, then a bigger house. So you're not attached to your house, and you move, yeah, very practical. In every home there is, as it is in the Vedic culture, there's a well. Just like in our village in Gita Nagari Baru, Indonesia, every single home has its own well. So we have like about 40 wells in the community. And because, from the very beginning, we decided, and even up until recently, I don't know what the situation is now, but the government had been trying to, take electricity. Yeah. The power is there now? It is. For so many years, we actually did without electricity. And the idea is that every day you have to take your water by hand from the well, isn't it? So in Hungary, where they do have electricity, but they have a policy that there's only a certain amount of electricity just for like 1 or 2 light bulbs, and uh, and the devotees, they have come to that decision together that they don't take water from the tap, they take water from the well. So in this way, the well, because if you stop using a well, it will not maintain properly. Water has to be taken out on a regular basis, and by taking water out on a regular basis, then you get some exercise by doing it, and so generally it's like easier for of course, taking water from a well. A woman can also do that, but generally it's certain activities like cutting wood. They have a lot of they heat their heating system in Hungary, because it gets very cold. They have snow in the winter, is by wood, and they have a very nice arrangement system, which has been there for ages. It's like the traditional way of heating. So they have it's built inside in one of the rooms of the house. It's like it's like a big square that goes up. You could say a little bit like a chimney, and from that one place where they heat, it is distributed, in the different rooms of the house. So it's like cutting wood with an axe is generally done by men, because an axe is heavy and wood is heavy. So in other words, there are natural duties and activities that are more easily done by men, and others that are more easily by nature, done by women. When we artificially want to establish so-called equality and so-called freedom, as modern day people are attempting to do, then this brings about a lot of unwanted kind of results, which we see in modern day society. So for these two reasons, I would say, because of our not having sufficiently analyzed and discussed, and for not having introduced what Srila Prabhupada wanted us to introduce, means regular discourses, regular discussions, regular exchanges on the subject matter of Varnasrama through Varnasrama College, number one. And secondly, because of our living, our having become also very much attached to the modern way of living in the cities with all kinds of facilities, etc., and being in the flow of things, so to speak, by taking or accepting generally more things than we actually need. Because modern day society is like people, if you open people's wardrobe, they have more clothes there than they need, generally speaking. So therefore, not living in a more, I would say, natural lifestyle, therefore we find difficulty in understanding and accepting these basic principles in terms of and that is there, of course, in general society. Of course, in general society, people are going along with, the modern way of thinking, which is very, very different from the Vedic way of thinking. And we as Vaishnavas, as devotees, are meant to uphold that, even though spiritually we should all have, and we do all have the same opportunity to become God conscious, to become Krishna conscious. Prabhupada is mentioning this in these purports as well. Both men and women, both husband and wife, have opportunity to go back home, back to Godhead. But on the material platform, on the material level, there are basic differences that the Vedic culture acknowledges, recognizes, and if we try to artificially negate or reject those natural differences, then we fall in all kinds of anomalies and difficulties. And we are, as devotees, we're actually battling with this. As a community, we are battling with this in that we have major differences of understanding or differences of opinion. And unless those become resolved, then this will continue to create major problems within the society. So therefore, there is a need for these two things. If these two things are done, definitely it will help us to a very large extent to properly understand these principles of dharma, number one, and secondly, to properly apply them or follow them. It's only when we understand something, then we can apply and put into practice. And that has to do with ongoing regular discussions and deliberation on principles relating to the whole ideology of Varnasrama dharma. Number one, and secondly, living as close as possible, and ideally, because that's also standard instruction given by Srila Prabhupada, that if we are not engaged in frontline preaching activities in the cities, we have no business to be in the cities. We should be living as it is meant to be, in relation with land and cows. And this is not utopian. Naturally, it cannot be done overnight. But if we don't even understand the concept or don't accept it, then it will never happen, isn't it? It will never happen. And that is to our great, it will be to our great misfortune as individuals, as devotees, as a society as well. And it will be to the great misfortune of the general society. Because it's like, Prabhupada used to say, who's going to save the misguided people of the world? Who's going to present and give this knowledge of Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam? Well, it's those who have been fortunate to have received this knowledge. And Prabhupada was, of course, at that time preaching and giving discourses in Vrindavan, and he was especially pointing out how it is mostly the responsibility of those, not mostly, but especially the people who are born in India, because it's part of their culture. But it is also the duty and responsibility of anyone who has been fortunate to come in contact with this philosophy and way of life. So, so these remain, we call standing orders. Standing orders means they have yet to be taken up and fulfilled by our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. So I'll just finish here. I'll just read one, the first of the 5 instructions we have heard this morning from Narada Muni, which is text 25. To render service to the husband, these are the 4 principles to be followed by women described as chaste. 1, to render service to the husband. 2, to be always favorably disposed toward the husband. 3, to be equally well disposed toward the husband's relatives and friends. And 4, to follow the vows of her husband. Following the vows of the husband is something very important. I mean, it was in the Mahabharata, Gandhari who demonstrated this principle to a height that was never followed before, because Dhritarashtra was blind from birth. So when she came to know that she was marrying someone who was blind, it was like a major matter in her life, and she made a decision that shocked everyone. She voluntarily decided to become blind by blindfolding herself, isn't it? I mean, this is like, one could say, an extreme case. We're not asking women to do that. But it underlines this principle that she did not want to take a superior role or position by having that advantage of seeing, which was something that her husband, Dhritarashtra, could not see. So, I mean, this is a very profound, example, very profound realization on her part of her position as a wife, you know. So these are not meant to be. They cannot be also artificially followed, such examples, but they're there. They're there to teach us the basic principles that are there. So, any comment or question on this? Yes. Yes, we have time.
Thank you, Maharaj, for your clarification. We heard together Srila Prabhupada mention that if the husband, either a husband or wife, is like not acting properly, one should give up or his association.
Yes.
So generally speaking, in the modern day society, living separately, immediately people will think about divorce. And as we know that in the Vedic culture and the Vedic society, there is no such thing as divorce.
Yes.
So can you elaborate a bit more about Srila Prabhupada's statement about giving up the association of one husband or separate?
Yeah. So the question is, Hare Krishna. The question is that in the context of husband and wife, that as the Shastra mentions, if either the husband or the wife is fallen, then there is provision to live separately or to no longer associate with either the husband or the wife. But that, of course, we also read that women, that goes the same for men also, should not remarry. And you were mentioning that in modern day society, of course, most people who are not following Vedic culture, they generally go for a divorce, which is not sanctioned or not allowed in the Vedic culture. So your question was how to, can I elaborate on what Prabhupada meant by not associating with either a fallen husband or a fallen wife, right? So we also don't encourage divorce. We also don't encourage that husband and wife separate. And therefore, within our society, we have, since a number of years now, devotees who specialize in you could call it family counseling. What do they call it? The Grihastha Vision Team, something like that. There's one group of devotees. They are couples who've been married for many, many years, who are successful in their marriage have, therefore generally they're senior persons. We have a couple like that in Sharanagati, for example. And so therefore in it's always a little delicate and tricky to give general instruction. Uh, each and every householder situation will be different because each and every husband and wife are also different. So if a situation uh, occurs, and of course it is there in many of our householders, even as devotees, uh, because uh, to deal with life is not easy. To become Krishna conscious is also not easy. And there are challenges both for the husband as well as the wife. And therefore, sometimes situations become practically intolerable for either the husband or for the wife. In which case, Prabhupada was approving that in such kind of situation, the husband and wife, they can be uh, uh, living separately uh, because they can't manage to to live together. So, what does that mean? Uh, it it will again, every situation will be somewhat different, and but obviously a woman who is alone, especially with children, some means of support needs to be there. So in modern day society, they have a whole arrangement that if there is separation, then the husband is legally bound and he has to give and support financially to the to the wife, etc., etc. So uh, it's an important question, and I would say that the the specifics of the answer should be can only be understood or found after after due consideration to that particular situation where such problems arise. And that is why it's important, in the Vedic culture, those who are in Vanaprastha. So the again, I forget the exact name, Vision Team, Grihastha Vision Team. They are mostly people who are actually Vanaprastha. So Vanaprasthas are people who have already lived family life. So they have all kinds of knowledge and experience. They have generally raised children. They are more mature as devotees, and therefore they are very important members of society who can be helpful, who are meant to help, especially younger householders who are struggling possibly with their family situation. Of course, the whole modern setup is making it extremely difficult for everyone, including our own devotees, because of the whole atmosphere in which we are living. And also because the vast majority of our devotees have not received the kind of training that normally one should receive, both young men and young women. Uh, and although Gurukul is there mainly primarily for young boys, there is also education for young girls, which is a different type of education. Uh, Again, because these things are not discussed, therefore we have all kinds of misunderstandings about these things, And it is not, when the question was asked to Srila Prabhupada by one of his senior, it was Satsarup Maharaj, is Varnasrama also going to be for the women? Prabhupada said no, because Varnasrama college is training individuals primarily in their varnas. And the Varnas, of course, there are four Varnas, but Gurukul traditionally, for long term, was to give training for, as we know, Brahmanas and Kshatriyas, and they are the natural leaders in society. Prabhupada was not favoring, as a matter of fact, there are so many quotes are there about women taking on executive posts. Now this is common everywhere, including India. It's like women also join the army. Women also go in the front lines. Initially they were not; they were like in the back. But okay, you want equality, all the way equality, then you also go and fight in the front lines, which has been adopted, like in the U.S. Army a few years ago, I believe. But Srila Prabhupada was not favoring that women take on executive roles because there's a lot of interaction that is needed, especially in public, where you have to deal with both men and women, and it's just not the Vedic recommended role and responsibility for women, and Prabhupada condemned, countries where the head of the state are women, and this should not be misunderstood as being hateful towards women. There are, whatever is being explained by our great sages in the Shastra, well, it's coming for Krishna, and he has a reason for saying what he says, and for arranging society the way it is meant to be arranged, isn't it? So these things can only be properly understood when there's enough discussions and when there's sufficient purified consciousness to understand things, isn't it? Yeah. So I don't think there is a one answer to the question you're asking, and the ideal situation would be that individuals who find themselves in that kind of scenario should seek out the good counsel of senior Vaishnavas who have gone through married life, who may still be, generally they are even, there are two stages of vanaprastha. One stage, for example, is that both husband and wife, they together leave family life, but they continue to live together without any intimate association and focus on, Krishna consciousness. And the other one is that at some point, of course, the husband completely leaves and accepts sannyas, as we know. Or they continue separately as vanaprastha. So there are different scenarios. So I'm sure more could be said, but this briefly something. We do need to close now. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai Sri Prabhupada ki Gaura Primanande.